Imagine a war where the enemy dictates the rules of engagement from a distance so vast, so utterly inconceivable, that your most powerful weapons are rendered utterly impotent. Picture the cold dread that washes over you as an invisible force strikes, not from the known battle lines, but from beyond the horizon itself. This is not a hypothetical nightmare. It was the chilling reality for the Imperial Japanese Navy in 1944. Their courageous sailors and their proud admirals, steeped in centuries of martial tradition, suddenly found themselves facing a technological monster that defied every law of naval combat they had ever known. This is the harrowing account of America's ultimate battleship, the USS Iowa, and the terrifying, existential question that echoed through every Japanese war room, a question born of utter helplessness. What kind of gun is that? It was October of 1944, the Philippine Sea stretching endlessly under a relentless sun. A Japanese naval officer, his heart pounding a desperate rhythm against his ribs, raised his binoculars to his eyes. On the distant, shimmering edge of the world, 4 colossal shapes materialized, unmistakable American Iowa-class battleships. Swiftly his mind raced through the calculations. 23 miles. A wave of profound, almost dizzying relief washed over him. "Captain, his voice a little steadier now. "We are safe. They are far beyond the reach of our guns. They simply cannot touch us from here." The captain, a man whose face was etched with the grim resolve of countless battles, simply nodded. 23 miles. In all his years, no naval gun in history had ever achieved accurate fire at such an astronomical range. Then, without warning, the horizon ignited. Massive, searing orange flashes erupted, tearing holes in the peaceful sky. A guttural thunder, deep and resonant, rolled across the water, a sound that seemed to shake the very soul of their ship. The officer, frozen in a silent scream, began to count 1, 2, 3. An eternity of 40 seconds dragged by. Then, the vast ocean around his ship exploded. Colossal geysers of water, rearing 200 feet high, columns of white spray that dwarfed his vessel, rained down with thunderous impact. His binoculars slipped from his trembling grasp, his voice barely a breath. A desperate, broken whisper. "What kind of gun is that?" This was the fearsome introduction to the Iowa-class battleship, the most powerful warship America had ever conceived. A Leviathan of the seas, stretching 687 feet long, displacing 57,000 tons of raw, unyielding steel, and carrying a dedicated crew of 700 souls. But for the Japanese, her sheer, intimidating size was merely a prelude. What truly instilled terror in their hearts, what tormented their admirals and stole their sleep, were the guns. 9 magnificent 16-inch naval rifles, each barrel a monstrous 66 feet in length, each chambering a 700-pound shell of high explosive, a projectile heavier than a small car, capable of tearing effortlessly through 18 inches of solid steel plate, and the sheer force of its expulsion, a staggering 60 pounds of powder per shell. When an Iowa unleashed a full broadside, 9 guns firing simultaneously, the immense recoil would violently shunt the entire ship several feet sideways through the water. Sailors below deck would later swear it felt as though the colossal vessel had struck an uncharted reef. The force was so immense. Yet the true marvel, the aspect that defied all conventional understanding, was the utterly impossible range. 24 miles. 24 miles of accurate, utterly devastating fire. The Imperial Japanese Navy possessed nothing, absolutely nothing, that could even remotely approach such destructive reach. The true revolution, however, wasn't just raw power, it was unparalleled precision at unthinkable distances. Naval gunnery had always grappled with a fundamental dilemma. At 10 miles, you could still spot your target, perhaps adjust your aim and hope for a hit. But at 20 miles you were firing over the horizon, effectively lobbing massive shells into the void, praying they landed somewhere close. Every navy in the world wrestled with this crippling limitation. Extreme range inevitably meant a devastating loss of accuracy. But American naval engineers, driven by an unyielding spirit of innovation, had developed a solution that shattered these boundaries. It was called the Mark 38 Fire Control System. A mechanical marvel, these analog computers and intricate calculators consumed every conceivable piece of data of the ship's speed, the target's speed, the exact direction and velocity of the wind, the air temperature, Even the subtle Coriolis effect of the Earth's rotation and the minute wear on the gun barrels from previous firings. Every single variable, every nuance of their world, was meticulously fed into these brilliant mechanical brains, churning out a firing solution with an almost supernatural precision. The guns would then hit targets the crew couldn't even visually detect, targets lost to the curvature of the Earth. Japanese intelligence, having painstakingly studied captured documents pertaining to these systems, had come to a stark, dismissive, yet ultimately self-defeating conclusion: impossible. Such an unparalleled level of accuracy at extreme range, they emphatically declared, violates the fundamental laws of naval warfare. They were about to receive a brutal, unforgettable lesson that American engineers cared little for their laws, only for results. On October 24, 1944, the Battle of Leyte Gulf erupted into history, the largest naval battle ever witnessed. 200 ships, thousands of aircraft, all locked in a titanic struggle that would irrevocably decide the fate of the Philippines. The Japanese combined fleet, desperate in the face of overwhelming odds, launched a colossal gamble, splitting into three forces. They aimed to assault the vulnerable American landing force from multiple directions. Admiral Kurita commanded the crucial center force, 4 battleships, 8 cruisers, and dozens of destroyers. His mission was crystal clear: punch through the American defenses, annihilate the vulnerable American transports and their escorts. Standing directly in his path were just 2 American battleships, the legendary USS Iowa and the unwavering USS New Jersey. Kurita, meticulously poring over his intelligence reports, knew the Iowa-class ships were fast, heavily armored, and lethally dangerous in close quarters. But he had conceived a brilliant plan. His fleet, he was convinced, would engage from maximum range, leveraging their superior numbers to overwhelm the Americans. His own flagship, the mighty battleship Yamato, boasted fearsome 18-inch guns larger than anything the Americans possessed. Kurita entered the battle convinced he held the decisive advantage. He was tragically, fundamentally mistaken. As dawn broke, Kurita's confident fleet advanced, a formidable array of steel and firepower. Then, at a shocking 22 miles, the Iowa unleashed her fury. The Japanese fleet watched, paralyzed, as the distant horizon erupted in fire, then held their breath in terrified anticipation. 40 agonizing seconds passed, the shells screaming through the void above. Kurita's flagship, the colossal Yamato, shuddered violently, a ripple of fear running through her crew. A massive geyser, a column of liquid fury, erupted a mere 50 yards off her port bow, a chillingly precise near miss. Then another and another. At 22 miles, the Americans weren't just firing. They were bracketing his flagship with terrifying, surgical precision, landing shells with impossible accuracy. Kurita's strategic confidence shattered like fragile glass. His own guns, the fabled 18-inch rifles of the Yamato, while theoretically capable of a 26-mile reach, were notoriously inaccurate at such distances, lucky to even hit the correct hemisphere of the ocean. Yet, the Americans from beyond the horizon were placing shells within 50 yards of his ship, repeatedly, relentlessly. In that moment of profound, shattering revelation, Kurita made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his days. He ordered a full retreat. His entire center force, 4 battleships, 8 cruisers turned away, their massive hulls churning the water, fleeing from just 2 American battleships. His officers protested fiercely, arguing their numerical superiority, their overwhelming firepower. But Kurita, his face grim, simply pointed to yet another geyser, this one a mere 30 yards away. He shook his head slowly, his voice heavy with the weight of despair, uttering a truth that cut deeper than any shell. They can hit us. We cannot hit them. We are sailing into a slaughter. The retreat, born of an agonizing terror, saved his fleet from total annihilation. But it sealed Japan's fate in the Battle of Leyte Gulf, and ultimately, accelerated the end of the war in the Pacific. All because of guns that could reach farther, with accuracy, than seemed humanly possible. Leyte Gulf was not an isolated incident. The Iowa's guns routinely instilled a profound terror in the Japanese. In February 1944, amidst the battle for the Marshall Islands, heavily fortified Japanese shore batteries, concrete bunkers, and artillery positions, meticulously dug deep into coral rock, formed a seemingly impenetrable defense. American Marines desperately needed these positions obliterated before their landing. The USS Iowa was assigned the daunting task of shore bombardment. Japanese gunners watched the massive battleship approach, their faces smug, unconcerned. Their bunkers, they boasted, were invulnerable, built with 3 feet of reinforced concrete, designed by German engineers before the war, capable of withstanding anything. The Iowa anchored 18 miles offshore, a distance well beyond the pitiful, limited range of the shore batteries. The Japanese commander allowed himself a grim, confident smile. "They cannot possibly touch us from there," he declared, convinced of his safety. Then, slowly, with an almost deliberate menace, the Iowa's gargantuan main battery began to traverse and elevate, the colossal barrels pointing towards the heavens like instruments of divine wrath. Then, with a series of concussive roars that seemed to tear the very air apart, they fired. The Japanese commander watched through his periscope, seeing nothing but clear skies and empty horizon. No incoming shells. He checked his watch, his brow furrowed. 30 seconds. Then 40. Still nothing. Then, without warning, the first bunker vaporized. Not merely damaged, not simply cracked, utterly disintegrated. A 700-pound armor-piercing shell, plunging at unimaginable terminal velocity, had ripped through 3 feet of reinforced concrete as if it were tissue paper. The bunker, and every single soul inside, simply ceased to exist in a flash of unholy destruction. The commander stared, his mind reeling, desperately trying to comprehend. That bunker had been 2 miles inland. The battleship 18 miles offshore. That meant the shell had traveled a staggering 20 miles, struck a stationary target, and penetrated 3 feet of concrete. Impossible, he whispered, a desperate plea for reason in a world that had suddenly gone mad. Then the second bunker exploded. Then the third. One after another, methodically, precisely, unstoppably. The Japanese shore batteries were completely helpless, their guns silent. The Iowa was beyond their reach, an unseen ghost of death. All they could do was watch and die. Survivors of the bombardment, found days later, were utterly shell-shocked, traumatized beyond measure. American interrogators asked them about their defenses, why they hadn't fought harder. One prisoner, his eyes vacant, simply laughed, a broken, hollow sound that echoed with unspeakable horror. "Fight," he rasped, his voice barely a whisper. "Fight what? We never even saw the ship, just explosions. From nowhere. Our bunkers, our guns, our ammunition, everything just gone." He paused, looking at the interrogator with a profound, terrifying question in his eyes. What kind of gun can do that? The psychological impact was utterly devastating, tearing at the very fabric of Japanese naval doctrine. Their entire military philosophy, built around the glorious battleship, the decisive fleet engagement, ship against ship, gun against gun, it was all rendered tragically obsolete. The Yamato, the Musashi, the greatest battleships ever constructed, larger than the Iowa, more heavily armored, boasting bigger guns. But their immense power was meaningless if they couldn't hit what they couldn't reach. And the Iowa class, they could reach everything. Japanese admirals, once eager for a decisive clash, began actively avoiding engagement, their strategies riddled with caution. Why risk your precious fleet, your national honor, against an enemy that could wound you, could kill you, from far beyond your own gun range? This wasn't cowardice, it was a cold, brutal, and ultimately rational calculation. You simply cannot possibly win a fight where the enemy can inflict lethal damage, but you are utterly unable to return fire. The Iowa-class battleships effectively created an impenetrable bubble of control, extending 24 miles in every direction. To step inside that bubble meant certain death. To stay outside meant strategic irrelevance, a slow, agonizing defeat without battle. The Japanese, in their terror and awe, christened it the zone of death. American sailors, with their characteristic pragmatism, had a much simpler terms: maximum effective range. Yet, what's truly astonishing, even more so than the incredible, game-changing range, was the consistency of these guns. The Iowa could fire those colossal guns day after day, week after week, without losing an ounce of their terrifying accuracy. Other navies' long-range guns would suffer rapid wear, their barrels degrading after just a few hundred shots, their accuracy plummeting into unreliability. but the Iowa's 16-inch guns. Each barrel was engineered for a remarkable 300 full charge shots, and if needed, they could even be replaced at sea. The ship carried spare barrels, a testament to its design as a self-sustaining, floating fortress, capable of maintaining its killing power indefinitely. Japanese intelligence, desperate for answers, meticulously analyzed this capability, their metallurgists poring over captured shell fragments, examining their composition with frantic urgency. They discovered that the Americans were utilizing advanced steel alloys and manufacturing techniques that the Japanese simply could not replicate. Materials that allowed for such sustained performance. But beyond superior materials, there was an even more fundamental, crushing truth: America's industrial might was utterly unmatched. While Japan could painstakingly construct a single battleship, slowly and meticulously, America built 4 Iowa-class battleships in less time than it took Japan to complete one Yamato. And the Iowa-class were faster, more reliable, and devastatingly more accurate. This wasn't just warfare, it was industrial warfare, a relentless factory of victory. America's true superweapon wasn't merely the atomic bomb, it was the audacious, unparalleled ability to build anything better than anyone else, and with a speed that utterly overwhelmed its adversaries, breaking their spirit long before their fleets met in battle. By March 1945, as the Battle of Okinawa raged, the final, brutal major naval campaign of the war, the Japanese, in a final, desperate act of defiance, launched Operation 10, Go the Yamato, the glorious pride of their fleet, on a one-way suicide mission. No air cover. Barely enough fuel to reach Okinawa. The plan was chillingly simple: beach the colossal ship, use it as an unsinkable fortress, let its crew die defending it to the last man. American intelligence uncovered the plan, immediately dispatching aircraft carriers to intercept. But ever vigilant, they also positioned the Iowa and other battleships, a formidable line of defense, just in case the Yamato somehow broke through. Aboard the Iowa, gun crews prepared, ready for the ultimate confrontation, a clash of titans. They had heard the legends of the Yamato, the largest battleship in the world, fearsome 18-inch guns, armor impervious to torpedoes. But they were not worried. They had done the math. At 20 miles, the Yamato's shells, arcing high, would strike the Iowa's heavily armored deck, her strongest, most protected point. Conversely, the Iowa's shells, arriving on a flatter trajectory, would impact the Yamato's side armor, precisely where she was most vulnerable. The definitive engagement that would have decided unequivocally which ship was superior never happened. American aircraft found the Yamato first, sinking her with a relentless barrage of torpedoes and bombs, before she could even reach the American fleet. Some historians call it lucky that the Iowa never had to face the Yamato in a gunnery duel. But American fire control officers, masters of their craft, vehemently disagreed. We would have won, one officer declared years later, his voice resonating with unwavering confidence. The Yamato had bigger guns, heavier armor, yes, but we could hit from farther away, and we would have hit first. In naval combat, the first hit wins. Always, the Yamato, that colossal symbol of Japanese naval power, tragically sank without ever firing a single shot at an American battleship. The USS Iowa, however, endured. She served with unparalleled distinction through World War II, Korea, Vietnam, and even the Gulf War, an astonishing 60 years of unbroken, active service, a testament to her unmatched design, because no enemy could ever truly match what she represented. Today, the legendary USS Iowa sits as a magnificent floating museum in Los Angeles. You can walk her hallowed decks, stand in the shadow of those massive 16-inch guns, touch the cold, silent steel of their barrels. Look closely. You can still see the wear marks, the deep, honorable scars from hundreds of shots fired in anger. Each gun barrel is a silent, towering testament to American engineering, to the brilliant minds who designed them, the tireless hands who built them, and the brave men who fired them. And it stands as a stark, enduring reminder to the Japanese sailors who faced them, learning, with bitter certainty, what true range truly means. The Iowa-class battleships were never defeated in combat, never even damaged by enemy fire. Why? Because no enemy could ever get close enough to hurt them before those terrifying guns reached out and touched them first. 24 miles. That was the physical, lethal reach of those guns. But the psychological range, that extended far, far beyond any measurable horizon, reaching deep into the hearts and minds of the enemy. Every Japanese naval officer who studied the Iowa class, every admiral who planned operations, had to factor in those guns, those invisible titans of destruction. They had to ask themselves the haunting, agonizing question, can we get close enough to fight, or will we perish before we even see them? Usually, the answer was the chilling second one. That is the profound strategic power of overwhelming technological superiority. It doesn't just win battles, it often wins wars without fighting them, simply by making the fight seem utterly unwinnable before it even begins.